cold gust of wind swept through the streets of Cincinnati as Usha Vance stepped out of a local bookstore. The late autumn air carried a sharp bite, and the sky hung low with gray clouds threatening rain. Dressed in a navy blue coat, her dark hair neatly pulled back, she clutched a book in one hand while adjusting her scarf with the other. She was about to cross the street when a frail voice called out from the corner. "Ma'am, can you spare $1?" The voice belonged to an older man sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in layers of tattered blankets. His beard was unkempt, his eyes weary, and his face weathered by time and hardship. A small cardboard sign in front of him read, "Homeless. Anything helps. God bless." Usha Vance paused mid-step, her eyes scanning the man. She had encountered panhandlers before, like most city dwellers, but something about this man's request caught her off guard. He wasn't shouting or aggressively asking for money like some others. His voice was calm, almost resigned, as if he already expected to be ignored. The people around her walked by without a second glance. A businessman in a crisp suit, a mother pushing a stroller, a couple engrossed in their conversation. No one acknowledged the homeless man's presence. Usha, however, didn't move. Instead, she crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" she asked. The man hesitated before answering. "Richard," he said hoarsely. Usha nodded. "Richard, why do you need the $1?" Richard let out a dry chuckle. "I could spin you a sob story, ma'am, but truth is, I'm just trying to get a cup of coffee. Been out in the cold too long." A flicker of something passed through Usha's eyes. Sympathy? Curiosity? It was hard to tell. She reached into her pocket, and Richard's eyes briefly lit up, expecting the metallic jingle of coins or the crisp fold of a bill. But what she did next left him, and those who overheard, completely stunned. Richard's fingers twitched as he watched Usha Vance reach into her pocket. He had been in this situation before. Sometimes people ignored him entirely. Other times, they tossed him some spare change, muttering something like, "Stay warm," before walking away. But this woman, she was different. She was actually talking to him, looking at him, as if he were a real person and not just another faceless beggar on the street. Then, to his complete surprise, Usha did not pull out a dollar bill. Instead, she extended her hand toward him, empty. "Richard," she said firmly, "I can give you $1, sure, but will that really help you?" The homeless man blinked in confusion. "Well, I mean, a coffee would be nice." Usha didn't move. "How long have you been living on the streets?" Richard shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He wasn't used to people asking real questions. Usually, they either handed him money out of guilt or ignored him out of apathy. But this woman, who was she? And why did she care? "Couple of years," he admitted. "Lost my job. Things went south. One bad turn after another." She nodded as if she understood, though Richard doubted someone like her. A woman who looked educated, well-dressed, and completely in control, could ever really know what it was like to be him. "Here's what I'm thinking," Usha said after a moment. "I won't give you $1. Instead, I'll take you to a diner. You get a hot meal, some coffee, and we can talk. How does that sound?" Richard's eyes widened. This wasn't how these interactions usually went. Most people gave their charity and hurried away, content in their small act of kindness. But this woman was offering him something more. A conversation, a seat at a table, maybe even dignity. His stomach growled at the mere thought of real food. Not just coffee, but eggs, bacon, toast, things he hadn't tasted in weeks. Still, years of disappointment made him cautious. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care?" Usha Vance smiled slightly. "Because I know what it's like when life doesn't go the way you planned." Richard studied her face. There was something sincere in her voice, something that told him she wasn't just another do-gooder looking for a story to tell at a dinner party. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Slowly, he nodded. "All right, lady. Let's see what this is all about." The warmth of the diner hit Richard like a wave as he stepped inside. After months of braving the cold streets, the simple sensation of heated air on his skin was almost overwhelming. The place was a modest, old-school diner with checkered floors, the scent of fresh coffee in the air, and the faint hum of a jukebox playing in the corner. A waitress glanced at Richard warily, likely wondering if he was about to ask for a handout, but Usha gave her a reassuring nod. "Table for two," she said with authority, making it clear that Richard was her guest. They sat down in a booth near the window. Richard instinctively hunched his shoulders, suddenly self-conscious about his ragged clothes and the smell of the streets clinging to him. But Usha acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. She handed him a menu. "Order whatever you like." Richard hesitated, his fingers brushing the laminated pages. It had been so long since he'd been given a choice about what to eat. Usually it was whatever a shelter was serving, if he even made it there in time. "Are you sure?" he asked, eyeing the prices. Usha gave him a knowing look. "Absolutely." Swallowing his pride, Richard ordered a large breakfast platter, pancakes, eggs, bacon, and coffee. Usha got something simple, a cup of tea and a small sandwich. As they waited for their food, she leaned forward. "Tell me about yourself, Richard." He smirked slightly. "Ain't much to tell." She tilted her head, unconvinced. "Try me." Richard sighed. He wasn't sure why, but something about this woman made him want to talk. Maybe it was because she wasn't treating him like he was invisible. Maybe it was because, for once, someone wanted to hear his story instead of just assuming they knew it. "I used to have a job," he began. "Worked construction for years. Hard work, but it paid the bills." "What happened?" He took a deep breath. "Got injured on the job. My back never healed right. Couldn't work like I used to. Bills piled up and I couldn't keep up. Lost my apartment. Couch surfed for a while with friends. But you wear out your welcome fast when you got nothing to offer. Ended up here on the streets." Usha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply nodded. "That sounds really tough," Richard scoffed. "Yeah, well, life ain't fair." Their food arrived, and Richard wasted no time digging in. As he ate, he kept glancing at Usha, still trying to figure her out. Finally, he set down his fork. "All right, your turn," he said. "Why are you doing this? You some kind of social worker?" Usha chuckled. "No, nothing like that. But I do believe in second chances." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You saying I got one?" She sipped her tea thoughtfully before answering. "I'm saying maybe you deserve one." Richard stared at her, unsure whether to believe her. No one had ever said that to him before. For the first time in years, a tiny spark of hope flickered in his chest. Richard let those words settle in the air between them. Maybe you deserve a second chance. He wanted to believe it, but years of disappointment had taught him otherwise. Life had been a series of letdowns, and hope was a dangerous thing to hold on to when you had nothing. Still, he couldn't deny that sitting here in the diner, warm and with a full plate in front of him, felt like a glimpse of the life he had lost. Usha watched him carefully, reading the skepticism on his face. She set down her tea and leaned forward. "Richard, let me ask you something. If you had the chance to turn things around, would you take it?" He frowned, chewing on a piece of bacon. "What kind of chance are we talking about?" Usha folded her hands on the table. "A fresh start, a way off the streets. But it won't be easy." Richard huffed a laugh. "Lady, nothing in my life has ever been easy." She smiled. "Then you're already prepared for the hard part." Richard narrowed his eyes, suddenly wary. "What's the catch?" "No catch," she said simply. "I know some people who run a program for folks in situations like yours. They help with job training, temporary housing, and getting back on your feet." Richard stiffened. "I've heard that before. Most of those programs got 100 hoops you gotta jump through. Or they don't take people like me." Usha nodded. "I get it. And I won't lie to you, it won't be immediate. But this is a real opportunity. You'd have to commit, show up, do the work." Richard pushed his plate aside, suddenly feeling restless. "Why me? There's a dozen guys out there just like me. A skin for a buck." "Because you asked," she said, her voice steady. "And because I think you're ready for something more than just $1. He exhaled sharply. He wanted to believe her, but he had been let down too many times. The idea of starting over was terrifying. And yet, he thought about how cold the nights were getting, how tired he was of feeling invisible, how much he missed having a purpose. "Let's say I say yes," he said slowly. "What happens next?" Usha smiled. "You finish your meal, and then we make a phone call." Richard looked down at his half-eaten plate, then back at Usha. For the first time in years, he was being offered more than just pocket change. For the first time in years, he had a choice. Richard stared at Usha for a long moment. The warmth of the diner, the scent of fresh coffee, and the weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. A choice. He hadn't had a real choice in years. The streets didn't offer choices. They offered survival. Each day was a struggle to find food, shelter, or just a warm place to sit without being told to move along. But now, sitting across from a woman who barely knew him yet believed in him, he realized something. He was scared, not of failure. He had failed before. He was scared of hope. Because what if he took this chance and it didn't work out? What if he tried only to end up right back where he started? Usha seemed to sense his hesitation. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad, scribbling something down. When she was done, she tore off the paper and slid it across the table. "This is the number of the program director," she said. "His name is Mark. If you call, he'll know I sent you. He can get you started." Richard hesitated before picking up the slip of paper. He turned it over in his fingers, the ink smudging slightly under his rough hands. Usha wasn't demanding an answer. She wasn't pressuring him. She was giving him something rare, the power to decide. He swallowed hard. "You really think I can do this?" Her expression softened. "I think you already have what it takes. You just need someone to remind you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Richard felt something stir inside him. A whisper of possibility. He slipped the paper into his pocket. "I'll think about it," he said gruffly. Usha smiled knowingly. "That's all I ask." She signaled for the check, and as they left the diner, the cold wind bit at Richard's skin. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel as cold. They reached the sidewalk, and Usha turned to him. "You take care, Richard." He met her gaze, nodding. "You too." She gave him one last encouraging look before walking away, disappearing into the city crowd. Richard stood there for a moment, looking down at the crumpled paper in his hand. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped toward a payphone on the corner. Hope was scary, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk.